view has been burned into my consciousness over the past 23 years. I was just a young and impressionable 14-year-old way back in 2001 when this beautiful album was released. Since then, and unbeknownst to me, I have seemingly been on a journey that has led me closer and closer to this guitar sound that I know and love so well. So how on earth did I get here? Over these last couple of months, I have been completely obsessing over Mike's guitar tone on Morning View, and I know lots of you are as excited about this sound as I am. So grab a drink and settle in. I'm going to go through every little detail of how I think this gorgeous guitar tone was created, and there will be plenty of sound examples later in the video too. So let's get going and start with part 1. The guitar. Now, it's no secret that Mike was a huge PRS user in the early days of Incubus, and for Morning View it was business as usual. However, this time he had opted for a Hollowbody 2 and a much deeper spruce archtop as his main guitars, leaving the 24 fret solid bodies behind. As to what pickups were in Mike's guitars, I made a video a few months ago speculating that Mike may have used the stock PRS archtop pickups. This I can now confirm is incorrect, as the owner of Mike's actual archtop from the Morning View days kindly got in contact with me and checked what pickups were in his archtop. It turns out that the neck pickup is actually a Seymour Duncan Jazz, and the bridge was kept as the stock archtop pickup from PRS. This is backed up by a 2002 Guitar One article I found that says the exact same thing, although they state that the PRSs had a JB in the bridge. I also found a great clip from Mike's old guitar tech Larry saying that they used a Seymour Duncan Jazz or a 59 in the neck, depending on the guitar.
I think for his guitars we did a lot of either 59 Jazz or JB Jazz, just depending on which guitar.
I do believe Mike used the neck pickup, being the Seymour Duncan Jazz, for the majority of the record, the only exception being the song Circles. Now for that, not only did I change the amp setting, again which I'll get onto next, but I was also using my bridge pickup. Now the guitar I'm using, I have only changed the neck pickup, so the bridge pickup is just the stock pickup. Now I'm pretty sure for Circles that would have been a JB. It sounds a lot fatter and it sounds like it has more output to it as well. Now to combat that, what I've done is use a very inexpensive boost pedal, which when I'm talking about all the effects pedals, I'll let you know what I did then. But that is the only song that I truly used the bridge pickup for. Both the archtop and the Hollowbody guitars utilised a Piezo pickup system under their bridges. When I first started to actively try and chase this guitar tone, I was somewhat convinced that the Piezo had a big part to play in the guitar sound of Morning View. However, in my research, every picture I could find of Mike playing live showed the mini toggle switch on his guitar was flipped down, meaning that the Piezo system wasn't active. The only time you can really hear it come into play is during the Morning View Sessions concert, and in particular the song Just a Phase. Instead of the Piezo being an integral part of the tone, I now believe that the scale length of the PRSs and where Mike used to actually strum the guitar have the biggest impact on this sound. If we take a look at this live footage from the Bazaar Festival in 2002, look where Mike plays. He's as close to the bridge as physically possible. This, coupled with the archtop and Hollowbody's 25-inch scale length, really adds to that honky sound that is all over the Morning View record. As an example, let me play the pre-chorus riff of Echo in between the pickups versus right at the bridge, and you'll hear what I mean. So with all of this in mind, my attempt to try and replicate Mike's guitars but keep the cost down, I opted for a PRS SE Hollowbody 2 Piezo. This has been pretty heavily modified now with the ability to blend the Piezo in with the magnetic pickups. It has a master volume control, and I have changed the neck pickup to be the Seymour Duncan Jazz. Ignore the switch that you can see, this just coil taps the humbucker if I want to. A good amount of time has passed since I made these changes to my guitar, and on reflection the only one I would change if I bought the guitar all over again is swapping out the neck pickup. All told, my guitar plus all the modifications has probably cost me just over £900 or so, and I want to give a massive shout out to my friend Tom, who did all these mods for me, and most of them were done for free. So thanks, Tom. Now, if we compared this price to a true archtop, we would probably be looking at between 4,000 to 5,000 or around 2,000 on a Hollowbody 2. So the SE not only plays great, it is considerably cheaper too. Knowing what I know now, I would choose the non-Piezo SE Hollowbody, as this could save you even more money on the guitar front. Or if you like the idea of the Piezo as well, the same guitar I have will work brilliantly by just leaving it stock and changing the neck pickup. Hopefully you'll agree with me that having an expensive archtop or Hollowbody 2 doesn't matter from the first sound clip in the video, and I hope you agree with me even more when you hear the sound examples later in the video. Now we know what we need on the guitar front, let's move on to part 2, the amp. In the early days of Incubus, Mike was using Mesa Boogie Trem-O-Verb heads combined with Mesa 4x12 cabs loaded with Celestion Vintage 30 speakers. For morning view, he switched it up a little bit and started using two Trem-O-Verb 2x12 open back combos, and these were still loaded with Vintage 30 speakers. The Trem-O-Verb seemed to be pretty unique in Mesa's lineup, as it has 4 different modes to choose from. On the orange channel there is clean or vintage high gain, and on the red channel there is blues and modern high gain. Having owned this amp for over a year now, I had been convinced that for morning view's tones, the orange channel should be on vintage high gain and the red set on modern. This seemed to be confirmed from a forum post I found that claims Mike's tech at the time, Larry, had said that both switches were flipped down on his amps. The orange channel on vintage high gain I absolutely agree with. It definitely nails the cleaner sounds from morning view. However, try as I might, I just couldn't get the modern high gain to sound like the record. I was so stumped for so long, trying every mic position and even adding extra EQ moves in my DAW. Nothing seemed to get me close to the sound that I was so desperate for. I was second guessing myself at every turn. Was the mic I had wrong? Had I got the pickup incorrect? Was there even something wrong with my amp? Not wanting to give up, I decided to give the blues mode a trial, and to my total amazement, as soon as I flipped the switch, the sound I know and love just jumped out at me with little to no effort. The mid-range I was looking for literally materialized out of one tiny flick of a switch. I'll add both channels settings on screen now so that you can copy these if you have the same amp as I do. Now, depending on your pickups, you may need more or less on the gain and will maybe need to tweak the EQ slightly, but it will get you in the ballpark. Another quick note for the amp, on the back I have the power set to bold and the rectification set to silicon diode, and I believe Mike's amps are set the same way. Now we know how to set our amp, let's move on to part 3. Effects pedals. If we take another look at the 2002 article from Guitar One magazine, we can see Mike's signal path. So from his guitar he goes into the rotosphere, to his 2 Boss PH2s, then to the DoD Gonculator, into the Boss RV3, to an MXR Phase 90, to a DoD FX25B envelope filter, to a Boss CS3 compressor, to a Boss OC2 octaver, and finally to a DoD 250 overdrive. I'll talk more about this overdrive in a little bit. This seems like a lot of effects, but don't forget these are pedals from Science and Make Yourself too. If we really break it down, there isn't a massive amount of pedals you need for the songs on Morning View. Let's take a closer look at what you'd really need. A delay pedal is a must, and ideally this would be a digital delay so the repeats stay as clean as possible. Mike uses the Boss RV3, and that is the pedal that I own. However, this has been discontinued for a long time now, so any digital delay you may have will do the job. Ideally, your delay will let some repeats keep going so it doesn't just stop abruptly when you turn the pedal off. The next must-have pedals are 2 different phases, the Boss PH2 and the MXR Phase 90. Both of these phases are used all over the album, and Mike of course has 2 PH2s. You don't have to have 2, as it's quite rare you would need both modes in one song. A PH3 would work just fine as well, but it will have a slightly different tone compared to the PH2. These next pedals would be nice to have, but aren't as important as the ones I just mentioned, and they are a rotary style pedal used for the verse parts of Just a Phase. Mike uses the Hughes & Kettner Rotosphere, and I'm using the Strymon Lex. Next would be a reverb pedal. There are a few songs on the album that have reverb on them, and this may have come from Mike's RV3 as it has delay and reverb, or it could have been added at the recording console. Lastly, a compressor pedal. Mike uses the Boss CS3, and this could help with echo solo and the harmonics in Are You In? So if you go for all of these, that is 6 pedals in total, or 7 if you have 2 PH2s. If you go for the bare minimum for Mike's sound, then you'll only need 3. A delay, a PH2, and a Phase 90. Now let's talk about the DoD 250. Now this is an interesting one, as I don't think it has a factor on the studio recording whatsoever. This seems to be an addition that Mike made later to his live pedal board around 2002 or so, that is backed up by the Guitar One article that we looked at earlier in the video. If you watch something like the Morning View sessions, there are a few shots of his board that you can see, and the DoD 250 just doesn't appear on there whatsoever. I'm not sure if this was the first instance instance of Mike taking a drive pedal and only running it through his clean amp just to make it dirtier if he wants to, much like he still does to this day, or if he was using it just to push the amp a little bit harder, if he wanted a bit more distortion from certain songs, I'm not sure. But when I tried my 250, it didn't really add much. It wasn't necessary whatsoever. Everything that you'll hear in the examples coming up were coming from just the straight neck pickup or the bridge pickup from Circles with a slight boost pedal in front just to give the amp a bit more of a push. The pedal that I used to do this was a very inexpensive Blackstar LT-Boost. So as you can see from the footage on screen now, I was simply just popping the gain up just ever so slightly and leaving the EQ controls flat. This doesn't color my tone in any way, shape or form. So all that it's doing is literally sending more signal to the amp just to give it that extra push and to break up a bit more. Lastly, if you have a big collection of pedals to emulate Mike's sound as I do, I really would recommend stripping them down to just what he used on Morning View and order them the same way as I mentioned at the start of this section. It really does make a difference to the signal that is hitting the amp. Now we know what pedals we need, let's move on to part 4, the microphone. Now as guitar players, we have a terrible habit of fixating on guitars, amps, effects pedals, everything else that goes into the signal chain, and we miss the real stars of the show. These being the speakers in the amplifier and the microphone that was used to record the sound coming out of those speakers. Now it's easy to find what speakers are in the Mesa Trem-O-Verbs, even if you don't have one, but in terms of microphones, this is where I got stuck spinning my wheels for the longest time. I even read an interview with Mike in another Guitar One magazine, I think around 2002 again, once Morning View had really blown up, and he even says in that he's not a big one to really mess around with tone. He literally just gets an SM57, puts it in front of the speaker, and then is happy with that. For some reason, I wasn't happy with that information. And so looking at something like the Morning View sessions and a lot of photos that I had seen from that era, you can see what looked like 2 condenser microphones on his dirty amp, and sometimes the clean amp, and sometimes on both amps. And it's actually this microphone that I'm talking into right now, which is the Shure KSM32. I went down a complete rabbit hole on this microphone thinking that I'd found some holy grail of the Morning View sound, which in actual fact is totally wrong. It is an SM57. I just wasn't putting it in the right position. Now, having said that, the majority of the songs I used the SM57, but for 11 AM, I was using this microphone. It sounds more correct to my ears. So this part is quite straightforward. Now let's move on to the trickier part, which is part 5, mic position. Now this is the part that really takes some finessing. Like I said before, I was really spinning my wheels trying to find the right microphone for this tone. And every time I used this microphone, I would get it to a point where I thought it was correct, then would come back the next day and listen, and just something just felt off every time. The most difficult part in matching these tones was that it doesn't just use one microphone position. Sometimes I found it needed to be bang in the middle of the speaker, and sometimes it had to be moved a lot further away from the middle of the speaker. Now, for where I am, I'm in a small kind of little office pod that we have had built in my garden, and I have neighbors all around. I can't play a loud 100-watt Trem-O-Verb at its full capacity because it's just too loud. It destroys my ears in here, and it's far too loud for everyone else involved around me. So what I did was grab this microphone and my SM57 and put them at different points across my left speaker, as it's the one that sounds the best. I then created impulse responses of that speaker, so instead of having to sit and move the microphone in tiny little increments across the speaker as I'm playing, I could load them into my DAW using an IR loader, and I could physically move the microphone as I'm playing. Another helpful bit of kit was I was using Moises to strip the guitar from the original track, and that meant I could put a spectrum analyzer with an EQ on each of those tracks and my guitar track, and kind of visually see the sound that was going on my screen. This way, as I'm playing, I can change the mic position in my IR loader and see what lines up best with the EQ. Once I found the correct placement for the SM57 after total frustration with this microphone because I couldn't get it to sound just quite right, I could see what I was after lining up on the EQ graph almost perfectly, so I knew I had the right mic position. Now the exciting thing about this is I have made these IRs available to purchase. So if you do download these IRs, one pack contains the completely raw files that have no EQ applied to them whatsoever. So that includes my SM57 and the Shure KSM32 at various points across the speaker. So this goes from the very middle of the speaker and slowly works out all the way to the edge. This way, not only can you have a go at replicating Mike's Morning View tones for yourself, but you could also use these IRs in your own music and maybe create some different sounds. The other folder contains all the EQ moves that I have done to match Mike's Morning View tone from the record. So all you would have to do is get an IR loader and load those in, and boom, you're done. Now there is a big caveat here. Please don't think this is an instant Morning View tone regardless of what gear you have. Obviously I have EQ'd these based on my gear. So my Trem-O-Verb amp, my SM57, my guitar that is trying to match Mike's guitars, all of these bits and pieces that if your guitar is totally different or you have a totally different amplifier, obviously they are not going to sound exactly like the sound examples that I've got coming up. So please don't download these and think that they'll be an instant Morning View tone, because it just won't happen. If you have very similar gear to me and you have the ability to use an IR loader with your physical amp, then hopefully these will be magic for you. You can literally just load them in and away you go. If you are interested in this IR pack, the link to download them is in the description of this video. While we're on the subject of microphones, the biggest challenge had been the volume swells for Are You In and Nice to Know You. I tried to find the best mic position that I could that sounded the closest, but to me it sounds like a lot of room sound, and I have no idea what they used as room microphones, and obviously the Morning View house itself is such a unique space that it's only going to sound like itself, so that's very hard to replicate in a very small little room that I am currently in. I've EQ'd these as best as I can to try and make them sound like the record, but obviously I'm trying to EQ something that I believe is a room sound, and that the direct microphone has been backed off a little bit and the room has been pulled up a bit. And that kind of goes for most of these guitar sounds that I've tried to replicate. Because I'm using Moises to sort of strip out that guitar sound, it does seem to take a lot of the maybe cymbal wash and things that come and get lumped in with the guitar as well, which obviously I can't then put back in. So what you'll hear in the sound examples later is that the guitar in its essence sounds, in my opinion, pretty close, but there is this kind of wash in the background that gets taken out, and it loses almost this power of a whole band playing very loud instruments in this amazing room that I imagine was being captured by some sort of room mic as well, and that was blended into the entire sound as well, which I cannot replicate in my little space. There are reverb plugins and things which I've played around with, and on some tracks I have added a reverb of a large room that sounds quite nice on the volume swells and things, but for the most part I just can't replicate it. And I have to be okay with that, even though it really annoys me. But there we go. Now we know more about the mic positioning, let's move on to part 6, EQ and post-processing. Now the last piece of this puzzle I believe lies in what the signal path was from the microphone on the guitar cab into the recording console that it was actually tracked on, and then we are trying to replicate a sound that has been mixed and mastered as well. Now getting the right pickup, the right amplifier, and the right microphone with the right microphone position is one thing. That is a big chunk of the sound done. The one thing that is out of my control is what EQ moves were made at the time of tracking, at the time of mixing, and if there was anything done at the time of mastering as well, which would have only been a little bit. Once I was happy with the microphone position that I was getting and how it was sounding, I then added an EQ by Voxango, which allows you to EQ match a sound. This then quite precisely plots any gaps that are missing or takes down any frequencies that are too high to really get me as close as possible to that sound. Now I would guess that these songs were tracked on some sort of Neve console, and the sought after Neve preamp is the 1073. I'm guessing that the desk that they use maybe had one of these, so I have added a free plugin by Analog Obsession to kind of emulate that. I would also guess that it was mixed on some sort of SSL console, so I've also added a free plugin by Analog Obsession that mimics an SSL channel strip. These are what I have baked into my IRs that I talked about earlier in the mic position part. So that's what you're getting if you download that pack, and everything will be EQ'd for you already. In terms of compression, I wasn't really using any compression as I was tracking these guitar parts. There is a slight bit that I used on some volume swells just to tame them a little bit so they weren't peaking too high, and I was using kind of a mimic of an 1176 compressor that is actually stock to the DAW that I use, which is Reaper. That can add a bit more weight to the guitars as well, but the way that I was EQing things, it was kind of adding that for me already. Now, I'm sure there was compression used maybe at the tracking stage and maybe some at the mixing and some at the mastering stage, but again, I have no idea what gear they would have used. There's no information about that kind of stuff, so I haven't really used a lot of that in this video. Whew. I hope you guys are still with me and are awake. There was a lot to take in there. Now that we have everything in place, let's listen to some sound examples. I will switch between my guitar tone and the studio originals. Enjoy! Well, there we have it, my friends. Everything you need to recreate Mike's tone from the wonderful album Morning View. Now, as I said in the microphone part, the one thing that I'm missing in these sound clips is that room tone, really. That's the biggest thing for me. This really has been a labour of love for me, and it has taken me far longer than I ever thought it would. But I am so happy to be putting this video out, and I hope that you've enjoyed it, and I hope that you agree that the sound comes pretty close to Mike's Morning View tones as well. If you wish to download my IR pack and start recreating these tones for yourself at home too, that link is on screen now. I hope you've enjoyed this one, my friends, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy tone recreating.